Welcome to Newswire. I'm Ayza Omar. So good of you to join us today. We'll start off with talking about what is next after 4 Brexit options have failed to get a majority in the House of Commons, and then move on after the break to discuss the latest verdict from the International Crimes Tribunal of Bangladesh. Now, yesterday in the UK, members of Parliament were again unable to find a majority for any alternative Brexit deal in a series of votes. Again, a repeat of what we saw happen last Wednesday in the House of Commons. So this time too, all 4 options were rejected. Although one, a plan to leave with a permanent customs union, lost by just 3 votes. Now, this is, of course, the second round of votes in the House of Commons on alternative proposals to Prime Minister Theresa May's Brexit deal. Prime Minister May's deal has been rejected on 3 separate occasions so far, as you must be following. Now, the House of Commons has been attempting to find some kind of strategy that can gain majority support, but so far hasn't succeeded. So the question is really, what happens next? And for that, let's discuss with our panel of experts. First of all, I'd like to go to a correspondent there in London, Miss Natalie Powell. Thank you for joining us, Natalie. Let me ask you right off the bat, the majority of the MPs, they didn't want a hard Brexit as we understood, and yet consistently they failed to reach any consensus. What does that essentially mean?
Exactly. I think really what it goes to show is just how divided Parliament is over a way forward for Brexit. As you've said, we've had 2 rounds now of indicative votes, and none of those possible Brexit options have really achieved a majority. Some have come closer than others, perhaps, and really what it symbolises is perhaps there is more appetite in the British Parliament for a much more softer deal than perhaps the British government is putting forward. But again, they are unable to form a majority on any of the options that have so far been put on the table. Of course, none of these options are binding. However, what it does go to show is what the appetite is for MPs. And remember, as a result of the Withdrawal Act here, in order for the British government to essentially get Brexit over the line and agree to that deal, they need the support of a majority of MPs in order to do that. So a lot of fractionism and a lot of confusion at the moment among MPs, and certainly a lot of anger as well coming out that very few MPs are willing to compromise at this stage.
And so from what we've seen on the different sort of turnouts of these votes, does it seem more likely that there will be a situation where a hard Brexit will take place? Is it more likely now as the scene develops?
Well, certainly the EU stance on this is that they are preparing for a no-deal exit. We know, of course, the default position is on the 12th of April. That is exactly what will happen unless an alternative is found. Of course, we have heard from the British government and the UK Prime Minister that they are unlikely to do that. The British Parliament doesn't have the appetite in a majority for a no-deal exit, and we've heard a lot of economists' forecasts suggesting that that could be potentially damaging for not only the UK but the EU as well. So it's possible, therefore, that we are likely to see a longer extension if it does get to that point, as opposed to a no-deal scenario. However, any kind of long extension needs to be signed off by the EU, and they will ask for something to happen, such as a general election or a second referendum, in order to grant that long extension.
So, Natalie, right now, what we are understanding is there is a cabinet meeting underway that is taking place with Prime Minister Theresa May. Do you have any update for us? What is expected of this meeting? Has it started? And when is it going to end?
Yeah, it started around about half an hour ago. We understand that it's likely to be about 5 hours in duration. And of course, the main topic on the table is going to be Brexit on this. MPs and the government are trying to pave a way forward. We know, of course, that the UK Prime Minister is keen on trying to get her deal through Parliament. It would be a 4th attempt if she were to bring it back to Parliament. So possibly we're expecting discussions around that, around how she may do that. There has been a lot of speculation over whether she may have a runoff between her deal, which is a harder form of Brexit, and the most popular deal as far as these other options, these indicative votes were concerned, and that would be the customs union. There is one suggestion that what she may actually do is put forward her deal combined with a people's vote. That means essentially that there would be a referendum going back to the people of Britain following the approval of her vote, if it did, of course, get through Parliament, and then the British public would essentially vote on whether they wanted her deal or potentially no Brexit at all. So there are lots of suggestions about what may be being discussed at the moment in this cabinet meeting, but essentially what we are seeing is the British Prime Minister really trying to pave a way forward to try and get a Brexit deal over the line. Otherwise, we're looking at a long extension or potentially a no-deal scenario.
We are now joined by Professor Alex D. Ruyter. He is the director of the Centre for Brexit Studies at Birmingham University in Birmingham. Welcome to the show again, Mr. Ruyter. Let me get your take on how you have seen yesterday's development unfold. Again, no consensus was reached. What is your opinion on this?
We've been following this for a long time. Clearly, the results of the indicative votes last night, UK time, did show quite a clear split on party lines. If you look at the minor parties, the SNP, for example, abstained on the notion of a customs union. They want to stay in the EU, and the majority of Liberal Democrat MPs did likewise. So it's a little surprised then that particular option didn't get a majority. It's essentially the Labor Party's approach, and that only reflects then that Parliament is divided amongst those who wish a softer form of Brexit, and that then gives the government potentially another opening tomorrow, of course, perhaps to try and push for Theresa May's agreement again, maybe by putting it in tandem with Parliament to have a so-called greater say in the future relationship. But I wouldn't rule out another snap election either. I mean, Cabinet, of course, is deeply divided as well, and we've had Brexiteers such as Liam Fox and Andrea Leadsom argue that they would prefer no deal than to be dragged down the route of a softer Brexit. So it's very interesting to see what the next few hours might bring in that regard. Labour, of course, their own stated policy is still to force the government to another election, so interesting times in that respect.
Now, one of the options that also did not win a majority, but just by 3 votes, the customs union one. What is the biggest criticism right now to the customs union option?
Well, Leavers hate it because in their eyes it essentially defeats the purpose of Brexit. If the purpose of Brexit in their eyes is to forge trade deals with other countries outside of the EU, be that the US or China in particular, if the UK is locked into a customs union with Europe as they see it, then that would forego any independent trade policy, because a customs union by definition means you have the same set of common external tariffs against the rest of the world. Now, for Remainers, on the other hand, a customs union is too hard. I mean, the SNP, the Lib Dems, the Greens, Plaid Cymru, these smaller parties in particular, the big chunks of the Labour Party would prefer to stay in the market. The Labour Party, of course, also argued that they want to have as close alignment with the single market as possible. And so therefore the customs union on that end also has its detractors. It may be seen as a sort of unsatisfactory middle ground, if you like.
Right, please stay with us, Professor. Natalie, also could you tell a little about what the sentiment is like on the street? What are the British people saying now as they consistently see of a no consensus being reached?
It tends to be one of, we talk a lot about Brexit fatigue here in the UK. Of course, you've got to remember that this negotiation period has been ongoing now for almost 3 years. And of course, other things that are very important, like social issues, knife crime, of course, which is another thing that has been huge in the UK recently. These types of social issues, it feels like they are being sidelined and ignored, according to some, as a result of Brexit, because politicians' minds are, of course, being very occupied with this one substantial issue, it must be said. So there's a lot of talk about Brexit fatigue, something that the UK public public have been hearing about for almost 3 years. And there's a little bit of confusion here about why MPs are unable to find a general consensus and a way forward. And of course, what we've got to remember is that in terms of these indicative votes, we've had the UK Prime Minister trying to pass her deal 3 times. She's been unable to do that so far. But these indicative votes, therefore, gave MPs the opportunity to show what type of deal they would be willing to form a majority on and a general consensus on. And that has failed so far to produce any concrete results. So it does seem that parliamentarians are in disarray, and many of the British public simply want the government and indeed MPs to get on with the job of Brexit. And therefore, once Brexit is finished and over and done with, although it doesn't look like that will come anytime soon, then those other important issues that are perhaps being put on the back burner can then be addressed by parliamentarians. So a lot of frustration really in the UK in terms of how the general public is feeling over Brexit.
Also, Natalie, that brings into question the future for Prime Minister May's political future. What is the consensus there now? Do we have any idea of whether she will be resigning if her deal is not approved in the next round, or any kind of consensus is reached?
Well, again, there's been an awful lot of discussion around Mrs May's future in this. We know, of course, last week that she offered to step down provided that MPs passed her Brexit deal. They didn't do that, and she's still in that seat in number 10. And of course, this is something that many people are questioning. She said that she would go earlier than indicated, and yet we've had no further indication of what that might look like. Now, as your last guest said, there's been a lot of speculation over whether she will call a general election to try to break the deadlock to some extent. But of course, polling on that has suggested that perhaps that might not even work, that her government may not have a majority come the end of a general election. And that is why so far we've not seen that general election being called for. And the other topic up for debate is whether, if a general election was called for, whether Mrs May would be in the top seat for that during that time. And one of the outcomes essentially would be that she would probably have to be, because there simply wouldn't be the time for a leadership contest for somebody to step into her shoes. So for the moment, it certainly looks like she is there, but we can never say never at this stage in Brexit.
All right. Thank you so much. That was Natalie Powell, Indus correspondent, joining us from London. Coming back to you, Professor, you heard our correspondent talking about the public sentiment. What, in your opinion, is the opinion on the street? Is it shifting finally? The situation 2 years ago seemed very different, how people were reacting to a Brexit. Now, do you feel that there is still a lot of confusion, or people are much fatigued by Brexit, as Natalie just said?
No, I'd echo those sentiments that your correspondent said there. I mean, at a day-to-day level for the person in the street, there's a lot of confusion around Brexit, of course, because it's one thing to say we're going to leave the EU. It's another thing entirely to talk about the complex technical negotiations that accompany having a legal agreement. And for a lot of Leave voters in particular, they just want to know why the UK isn't getting on with Brexit. Well, the simple answer to that, of course, is Brexit is 2 parts. You need to have a withdrawal agreement, but then you need to redefine what your future economic relationship is going to be. A customs union might be a relatively simple way of doing that. Anything more complicated than that, of course, could take years. And the EU-Canada trade agreement in itself, which was just a preferential trade agreement, took some 7 years to negotiate. So the realities of that, I think, are leading to fatigue. The fact that Parliament is in deadlock. I will say, in fairness to Parliament, it does reflect the nation at large in that sense. I mean, if another referendum were to be held and staying in the EU was an option, it would probably win by about 54%. But that just echoes the division of the country. So, Parliament in that sense is doing its job. I mean, it's scrutinising government legislation. It's just that we have a divided Parliament. If you don't like the Parliament, then you call an election, you're Prime Minister. If you can, you try and change the Parliament. Otherwise, you just need more working across party lines. And the approach of the Prime Minister to date has been somewhat lacking in that regard.
Mm-hmm. And the parliament itself is right now, as we see, it seems to be at an impasse, and it is really hard to understand how they would move forward, considering time and again the same scenario keeps unfolding. How do you see the parliament moving forward from here? And is there the idea of a deadline? Is that something that is very binding since it's been extended once, or can it be extended once again?
Well, it is possible the EU could extend it again. Yeah, I mean, if the other 27 leaders were to agree to such a thing, of course it could be. But of course, in terms of Parliament, I mean, the clock is ticking. The emergency meeting of the European Council of EU leaders that's scheduled for the 10th of April, the government need to come back with a response by then, effectively, or face leaving the EU with no agreement. That might be enough to jolt some parliamentarians' minds, particularly with the Brexiters, for whom the Prime Minister's negotiating strategy has been to try and say to them, look, if you do not back my agreement, you will face the prospect of a lengthy extension to the Article 50 period, or possibly even no Brexit. And of course, with her offer to stand down should they back her agreement, that swung quite a few of them over. It might well be, with time running out, if she were to present her agreement again and the Speaker, John Bercow, lets her, then maybe that might carry it over the line. But it's still very uncertain. And the only certainty in all of this, of course, is that if the UK government doesn't provide a response to the EU on the 10th of April, then the UK leaves the EU with no deal on the 12th.
Right, and all of this uncertainty, as the Parliament is at an impasse, this must have some kind of effect on businesses in the UK as well.
Well, yes, well, clearly we've seen that over the past couple of years with the effects on foreign direct investment into the UK and the continued uncertainty. Businesses operating in the UK, if we take the automotive sector as an example, they've been calling for clarity from government as to its future economic direction, whether we're in the single market or not, and whether we have a customs union or not. Now, clearly for some companies that it's crunch time now, and that's having an effect. Honda, of course, announced only some time ago that they were going to shut down their plant in Swindon in the middle of England. Brexit uncertainty in the lead up to that was clearly a factor. So it is having an effect on investment. The financial services sector have moved about 800 billion of assets to other places in the EU, and with the expectation something like 7,000 jobs will accompany that. So it's clearly having an effect on jobs and investment. And the longer this uncertainty goes on, the more deleterious those effects will be.
We are joined by correspondent Kevin Ozebek, who's joining us from Brussels right now. Kevin, what can you tell us in terms of what the EU is, how the EU is responding to the current second round of votes that have taken place in the House of Commons?
Oh, well, for sure. I mean, over here on this side of the channel, there's growing frustration and growing fear. We've heard, not just for weeks, but actually for months now, EU leaders really pleading with British lawmakers, asking them to please give a sense in terms of what type of Brexit they would support. The view from Brussels and the thinking here is that we've heard a lot from the House of Commons in terms of what it doesn't want, what type of Brexit it doesn't want to see. But we still haven't heard what type of Brexit it does back and what type of Brexit it can support. So the EU says time is ticking down now. There's not much time left, and they really do need an answer from the UK. This morning here in Brussels, we heard from Michel Barnier. He's the chief Brexit negotiator for the European Commission, and he's the architect, or at least one of the architects, behind the divorce deal that UK MPs have voted down multiple times. He did say at this point, the UK has three options. It can just crash out next Friday without a deal. It can ask for a long extension next week when there is a special emergency Brexit summit. Or UK MPs can do a smooth, orderly Brexit and finally approve the deal that he negotiated with Prime Minister Theresa May.
Kevin, is there any sense of which they prefer or which most likely is going to happen from your conversation with officials in the EU?
No, still, everyone here in Brussels is essentially on the edge of their seats, just waiting to see what is going to happen in London. And how the EU has engineered this, really the ball is in the UK's court. EU leaders say they're not going to renegotiate the divorce deal. That has been done. We spent 18 months doing that. We're not going to do that again. and they just don't think there's much more they can offer, if anything they can offer the UK, to try to get them to approve that divorce deal. So at this point, Brussels is just waiting for the House of Commons to make a move. The very last moment Theresa May is going to have to inform the EU of what it's going to do is next Wednesday, April the 10th. That's when that emergency Brexit summit is going to be called. That's when she will tell the EU 27 what her Brexit game plan is, or at least that's the hoping in Brussels, that she will come here with a plan.
All right. Thank you so much, Kevin, joining us from Brussels, giving us an update from the other side. Coming back to you, Professor, how bad would it be for the UK, considering the current state of the economy, what the referendum had decided 2 years ago? How bad would it be if there were to be a hard exit without any kind of deal even?
Well, 90% plus of economic commentators agree that leaving the EU with no deal would be negative for the UK. I don't think it would be Armageddon. For individuals, it would be a nuisance in terms of things like potential data roaming charges. But for business, let me repeat, for business, it would have significant disruptive effects if the EU were to start to impose a tariff regime or to insist on checking of things coming into the EU from the UK. The reasonable estimates suggested it could cost every person in the UK an average about £1,000. So a hard Brexit certainly would have a significant economic impact on the UK.
As much as the EU is running out of patience with how the UK will decide this, is there still a likelihood, considering that Theresa May is pushing her own deal forward, that there could be an extension? Would this be something that the MPs would agree on?
Well, I think a long extension, as your other correspondents have alluded to, would only be granted by EU leaders if it was to be for something like another referendum or a general election. It would have to be something very significant and a clear change of action by the UK. If it appears that Theresa May's withdrawal agreement is on the verge of being accepted, maybe, of course, there's still a lot of secondary legislation to incorporate EU law into UK law anyway. So it might be that they would have to grant something beyond May. The key sticking point with the May 22nd date offered, should the agreement be passed, of course, is any extension beyond that raises issues of participating in UK Parliament elections, for which legal opinion appears to be somewhat divided. But the consensus is that if the UK had a longer extension, it would have to participate in those elections.
And the cabinet meeting that is underway right now, can we expect any kind of critical changes that might help win over the majority of the votes to the options that are on the table?
Well, the Speaker, John Burke, of course, determines what particular motions can be put forward to Parliament. And he did rule that the withdrawal agreement that Theresa May had last time couldn't come again in its current form. There had to be some significant change, which, of course, is why last time round MPs only voted on the withdrawal agreement. The government is, entertaining the notion of trying to bring it back to Parliament with some kind of amendment promising MPs more say in the future relationship with the EU. I'm not sure that would be enough to pass it either. I think if it does manage to get back on the books and be voted on again, say tomorrow, then I still think a small majority of MPs would vote it down. I think it really has turned into what we call a game of chicken here between the government and Parliament as to who is going to blink first. Would Theresa May and Cabinet really risk leaving the EU with no deal? Or if Parliament is resolute in terms of what it doesn't want, be enough to ask them to go and seek a longer extension? I think that's going to be a real agonising debate, of course, given the Brexiter Remainer split within her Cabinet.
So there are 8 days left, essentially. That's a pretty tight margin to finalise something. Do you have hope that a consensus will be reached, the MPs will be won over one way or the other, because it's a critical 8 days ahead?
Yes, and I certainly think that the result of the indicative votes last night does increase the likelihood of leaving the EU with no deal, simply because Parliament is, given the party stance of the minority parties in particular, unable to come together around a single alternative. But maybe that will change. Again, the pressure of the clock ticking. Like I said, will that gel some more Brexiteer MPs into voting for Theresa May's agreement? Will the DUP ever change a heart? Of course, they've held out against it so far. Or on the other hand, if their agreement doesn't pass and MPs come back for another round of indicative votes on Wednesday, will they coalesce around a customs union agreement as a way forward, for example. All these, I'm afraid, still remain to be seen over the next 48 hours or so.
I mean, we have seen the margin narrow for certain options. We've seen the customs union option just lose by 3 votes, and similarly more favor for the public referendum. So things could turn around for the same options that didn't win the majority in the next few days.
Yes, they could. Yeah, I mean, they certainly could. And I wouldn't rule that out by any stretch of the imagination. It is distinctly possible that Parliament, given the small number of MPs required to shift, may coalesce around a single alternative option. But of course, these are still indicative votes. The government is not legally bound to have to act on them. And of course, we're talking very fine numbers here in Parliament, that they might or might not. It's not yet clear to me whether that would be enough to sway the government to accept the will of Parliament in this regard. Possibly.
And if a general election is called, if that happens, so what would happen to the deadline with the EU? Would that situation be put on pause?
Well, they have reiterated previously that something such as a general election would be a valid reason to seek a longer extension. Of course, your correspondent raised all the problematic issues around a general election. I have to agree, I'm not sure it would necessarily solve anything. Theresa May went to a general election in 2017 to try and get a bigger majority to negotiate a Brexit agreement and get it through Parliament, and she ended up losing a parliamentary majority. And the polls, at this point in time are still suggesting a fine split between the major parties, with the distinct result that we could have another hung parliament returned in the UK. So not clear that would solve the problem. It might buy more time, but that's about it, I think.
So it is critical the next 8 days how this turns for the UK. That was Professor Alex de Ruyter from the Birmingham City University. Thank you so much for joining us. And with that, we're going to take a quick short break. Don't go away. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Newswire. I'm Ayza Omar. Now moving on from Britain to Bangladesh, 5 men have been sentenced to death in absentia by a Bangladeshi court for atrocities carried out against the Bengali masses during the country's war of 1971. Now, this court, the International Crimes Tribunal of Bangladesh, is a special war crimes court which was established in 2009 by the Awami League government. Since 2012, 9 leaders of the Jamaat-e-Islami, the largest Islamist party in the nation, an ally of the country's main opposition party, have been sentenced to death. 2 of Bangladesh Nationalist Party have also been indicted as suspects in war crimes. Now, the ICT has faced many controversy and many criticisms from international human rights organizations and legal figures who have often raised objections to the way the court proceedings take place in the very process that is carried out. Now, impartial international organizations like the Human Rights Watch, which initially supported the establishment of the tribunal, has criticized it for lacking fairness and transparency, reporting claims of harassment of lawyers and witnesses representing the accused. Critics also say that the creation of the tribunal is a sort of a witch hunt against the Jamaat-e-Islami to be eliminated from Bangladesh by the Awami League. Now, whether any of these sentiments hold true across the board or with our experts, we will be speaking to them to understand more of how this tribunal works, what these indictment means as 5 more members of the Jamaat are sentenced. So let me welcome Mr. Tasnim Mohsin, a journalist who is joining us from Dhaka. And also we have with us Mr. Muhammad Molla, spokesperson for Bangladesh Jamaat-e-Islami in the UK and Europe. So let me start with you, Mr. Muhammad. First of all, welcome to Newswire and taking out the time. How do you take this latest verdict from the ICT?
The latest verdict, which has been given on 29th of March, those who have been sentenced, they do not belong to Jamaat-e-Islami. It has been wrongly published in the media that they belong to Jamaat-e-Islami. They are not leaders of Jamaat or members of Jamaat-e-Islami. But what I can say is that generally, the fair trial has not been maintained, as you said, quoting international human rights organizations, Human Rights Watch, Amnesty, International Bar Association, who has monitored the trial very closely. They have said that fair trial standard, due process has not been maintained. And it is not an international tribunal either. It is a domestic tribunal. And Awami League has set up this tribunal. Mainly, it is believed that to get political mileage. So I can say, as international community has said previously, has given their opinion, that Jamaat leaders did not receive justice. And as due process has not been maintained, it was just a political vendetta against an opposition Islamic political party.
So stay with me, Mr. Mohammed. I want to delve deeper into understanding the political mileage that Awami League would have in eliminating members of Jamaat who are a threat to their existence. Let me come to you, Mr. Tasnim. If you could shed some more light on who these 5 individuals are who have been sentenced in the latest verdict by the ICT.
I mean, if someone has been sentenced to death due to any sort of reason, the international media color him as Jamaat-e-Islami. Unfortunate. So there is nothing doing with Jamaat and other any parties. I mean, in the introduction, you say that the Jamaat-e-Islami has been convicted through this war crime tribunal, and you're supposed to know that.
Mr. Tasnim, sorry to interrupt you, but I'm still trying to understand. Are you saying they are not members of the Jamaat-e-Islami, and they're not? Who are these people? I understand your reference to Al-Shams, Al-Badr, and the Razakars, but do we have any understanding of who these individuals are? Are they politically active? Are they connected? Or are they...
No, they are not politically active. They are basically the member of Al-Shams, Razakar, and Al-Badr. So on that basis, the verdict has been given. Not seeing the color, whether he is from Jamaat, he is from other party, BNP, or he is from Awami League, the verdict has been given as this person has done the atrocity, the rape, the murder in 1971.
Is there confidence amongst the people of Bangladesh on the procedures carried out by the ICT that they are fair and transparent despite international criticism?
I mean, there is a huge pressure from the international side as well as from the local as well. People are, international bodies are saying the trial is not fair enough. But you have to remember in 2008, when Awami League joined the office in Bangladesh, there has been mandate due to, they has promised that they will end the culture of impunity and they will trial these war criminals. And after that, they came to power. So, so people have the confidence that whatever is going is okay.
Okay, so let me come back to you, Mr. Mohsin. What is your response to that?
Actually, when Awami League came to the power in 2009, and actually, but it was not the mandate given by the people that they will hold a politicians' tribunal. People are expecting that there will be fair tribunal, but fair trials. No, fair trial has not been maintained. As international community has said, that due process has not been maintained. And when the trials has conducted, that our judiciary was heavily influenced and controlled by the executives. And it has been revealed by the Skype gate that, you know, the law ministers and the other ministers has met the judges several times. And judges was pressured to give verdict against the leaders of the Jamaat-e-Islami, as it was leaked in the Skype gate candle published by the renowned Economist magazine. So it was a collusion among the court, tribunal, prosecutors, and the executives of the government, that it is a trial process against an opposition political parties.
Right.
And if you had followed the aftermath of the verdicts, you could have seen that millions of people came to the street in opposing the verdict against Maulana Saidi Ghulam Azam and Nizami. They are the popular leaders of Bangladesh, and people in Bangladesh do not believe that they are the criminals. They are just political leaders who are doing politics against the ruling government. So it is the crime of them is that they are the leaders of the opposition. They are the leaders of an Islamic political party. They have nothing to do with 1971. They are not involved in crimes. And people in Bangladesh, and the conscious people in Bangladesh, do not believe they are criminals. People in Bangladesh believe that Awami League actually has done the trial to get political mileage, to stay in the power, to punish the opposition,
but
to
speaking
weaken
of
the
political
opposition,
mileage,
to weaken Islamic opposition political parties.
So, speaking of political mileage, you mentioned something earlier about how this was a media propaganda. It was incorrect information being spread, that these 5 that have just been convicted were not Jamaat members, had nothing to do with Jamaat-e-Islami. Is this, in a way, sort of a disowning of the relationship of what Jamaat-e-Islami has had with Al-Shams and Al-Badr and these paramilitary brigades?
Awami League is conducting the trial to get political mileage. And the trials and the verdicts which was given against the Jamaat leaders, it was actually to weaken an Islamic democratic political parties. It was not for the sake of justice.
Okay, so it's not for the sake of justice. How do you respond to that? And having covered the events on the ground, do you feel that there is any impartiality or partiality related to the ICT's process?
If you look at the history, the newspapers and other documents, you will find the top Jamaat leaders were the member of Razakar, Al-Badr and Al-Shams. So I don't find nothing wrong in it. And Mr. Mohammed was saying that after the verdict given in 2013, millions of people came into the streets. And that's because they opposed the verdict. The verdict was like lifetime imprisonment, and the people of Bangladesh are asking for a death sentence, as because these people are made the atrocity in 1971 war. So the
but
thing
it also
is
brings I understand your point of view, but it also brings into question, and Mr. Mohammed, I'll ask you this, that Sina has been the PM even before the tribunal court was created in 2009. I mean, why was it 2010? Why is it that before this time she had not thought of making an ICT?
Yeah, it is a very interesting and important and significant question you are asking. Awami League was an ally of Jamaat-e-Islami in the political field. When Jamaat was an ally of Awami League has not said anything against Jamaat-e-Islami. They did not say Jamaat is a party of war criminals. When Jamaat-e-Islami has changed its sides, side with BNP, made alliance with BNP, then Awami League has made a strategy to weaken the opposition.
And it seems to have coincided.
In the power, dividing the nation.
Right, and it also
it was not for the sake of justice. When Jamaat was with Awami League, there was not issue of war criminals. When Jamaat is with BNP, then Jamaat is a party of war criminals. And as Mr. Afsan Chaudhary and Mr. Tasnim, if they have followed how the trials was conducted, you know that the law ministers, law ministers and the other ministers has met the judges, and it was revealed in the Economist newspaper that they have pressured the judges to give verdict, to give capital punishment. So it was the government who made the decision who will be punished and who will not be punished.
Okay, but Mr. Mohammed, we're running out of time. We're running out of time, Mr. Mohammed. I'm sorry, we'll have to keep.
Jamaat leaders did not receive justice.
Mr. Mohammed,
it was a politicized trial.
Thank you, Mr. Tasnim. Unfortunately, we've run out of time here. And Mr. Mohammed, for your participation here on Newswire. That's all the time we have. We'll see you next time. Till then, goodbye.